Thank you for joining us today for this session on ELS Progress. I just want to start with a few bits of housekeeping. So we're going to be recording this session. When it's recorded and this meeting is over, then we will share the recording as soon as possible. While we're speaking, all mics and cameras are disabled. But we do have the Q&A function, so please either drop questions into the chat or the Q&A function. We will respond to some as we go along, but we'll also have a question session at the end, so you can either ask questions then by raising your hand, or we will respond to everything that's in the chat and the Q&A then. So my name is Karra McFarlane, and I'm the publisher of ELS for Oxford University Press, and I'm super pleased to be joined by Tara Dodson, who is the author, one of the authors of ELS. So we're going to take you through ELS Progress, what it is, and really how to get started with it as well, because I know some of you are interested to have some tips on getting started, that you've bought into ELS Progress but just need those tips to get started with it. And start using it with the children. So what is ELS Progress? So ELS Progress is a catch-up pack for children in year 3 and above. So this is for children who've missed out on that rigour and consistency of an effective SSP. So this could be because of time out of school, this could be because they've joined the school at a different point. This could be for so many reasons that children have missed out. Obviously, as part of ELS, we have the in-lesson intervention, and then we have the sort of short, sharp interventions alongside the programme when the teachers are running through it with children in reception and year 1 and year 2 as well. But this is really for those children who've got to year 3 and still just don't have that knowledge of phonics they need to progress in the rest of their learning. So what this is not is day-by-day whole class teaching. This is not an SSP programme that is day-by-day teaching. It's catch up, and it's either to be delivered one-to-one or in small groups. So Tara will talk you through how a session works shortly, but just to say that ELS Progress is really closely linked to ELS itself, in the fact that it follows very closely the interventions that are part of the programme. So I'll take you through the resources in a minute, but in essence, it's a handbook that takes you through those lesson plans. And then it's also books that are age appropriate. So we've said this is for year 3. These books that are part of ELS Progress are age appropriate for those readers. The content, the topics, the design of the books, everything is made to really work for those year 3 children. And then those books are supported by phonics catch-up sessions, which are very carefully scaffolded around the books. So what's in the pack? So we've got resources for 6 children in each pack. So this might be a session that you want to deliver one-to-one, or you might deliver it in small groups. We're saying, by the fact that there's enough resources for 6 children, that the largest group you should be delivering this to is a group of 6 children. It should be 6 children and smaller. So in the pack, you've got 12 of our Readable Rise books. Now, these are the books that I've just talked about that are age appropriate for those children in year 3, but match to the lower phonics knowledge that they have. You've also got a set of ELS grapheme cards from phases 3 to 5. And then you've got the ELS Progress handbook. In the handbook, you've got lesson plans, word cards, and the assessment tracker that you'll need to complete this programme. So the word cards that I've just touched upon that are included in the handbook are there to pre-teach vocabulary. That is specific vocabulary from inside the book. So these are words that allow children to really focus on those GPCs that they've been learning as part of the session, but they are actual words from the books. So as well as giving them a chance to consolidate that learning before they go on to read a book, you're also giving them the opportunity to learn some of that vocabulary that they will meet in the book as well. So really setting them up to succeed when it comes to reading the books. So this is just a chart that shows you how the books align to the phases in ELS. It isn't the same as ELS in terms of the whole class teaching programme where you've got a book per week, because this isn't day-to-day teaching in the same way. this is books aligned to the different phases of teaching. And so there'll be a group of sounds that children are being introduced to, are consolidating before they go on to read the books. And the coverage is listed on the back of every book within the pack.
Thank you, Karra.
And we're going to, I was going to pass to you now. So Karra's going to talk about getting started with ELS Progress, because this is, I know, something that so many of you have expressed an interest in.
I think it's really important as well. Oh, I can hear myself echoing through. I don't know if I need to do something to just turn my volume down a bit. And it's really important what Karra said at the beginning. You know, this is not a whole class model like ELS, but this is for those children in Key Stage 2 who haven't got the code knowledge. The code knowledge is really important, because if we can't decode and blend, then we can't start to read more words, which means that we're not going to be able to be a fluent reader. It's not just decoding that happens when you're a fluent reader. There are lots of other skills that are part of that process. But one of the things that really underpins reading is the act of decoding and blending, so that once you start to gather all those GPCs and that knowledge, you can then make reliable guesses if you don't know the GPC. But as you start to get to the really rarely used ones, as you will know if you've listened to the training videos for ELS, there are quite literally hundreds of ways that we spell the sound in our language, and some of them we use very rarely. So it's things like that GPC knowledge that's going to allow you to have a reliable kind of guesstimation of what that word might sound like. A really good thing to do as an adult is to try and read some Welsh, because it's completely decodable. But it's very, tricky as a non-Welsh speaker and non-Welsh reader to have a go at decoding it. It's that same sort of like, I'm trying to make a reliable guess based on what I know. And that's sort of what we want to do with the kids, is give them as much GPC knowledge as possible. And yes, teach them other things discreetly as and when we need them. But we want them to have the knowledge to be able to make those reliable, those plausible assessments of what that word might be. And so if you've gotten through your phonics program and you are in Key Stage 2 and you haven't yet consolidated enough of that phonics knowledge, it's going to start holding you back in your wider reading, but also in your access to curriculum. So the reason why we teach reading, there's lots of different things and different skills that we're doing, but we do definitely need to make sure that they do have that code knowledge underpinning. And this is why Progress is a little bit different to ELS, because potentially ELS hasn't done the job for some of your pupils who may need some additional support. It may be that they've learned to read in a slightly slower pace. It may be that they are new to your school. It may be that, as an EAL learner, they found it harder. But equally, what we don't want to do is then have them come into Key Stage 2 and have texts that aren't age appropriate, that are going to demotivate them. And like Karra said with the word cards, the point of pre-teaching that vocabulary is so that they can go into that book feeling successful, just like we do in our lessons when we model the apply sheet every day. It's so that the children know how to be successful, understand what the words are that they're going to be coming across, and how to then apply that understanding. So getting started is quite simple if you've already taught and trained your staff with ELS, because the enable interventions are what the ELS progress lessons are based on. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But so what you need to do first is you need to know what your children don't know, so you can assess your children. If you're using ELS and you have access to Phonics Tracker, great, you could just do the whole phase 5 or the whole phase 3 assessment on there. But if you don't, in the handbook, there is an assessment grid, so you can see which GPCs the children do and don't know. Based on the outcome of your assessment, you're going to be able to work out which text is the
Karra frozen for everyone or just for me?
No, she's frozen.
Okay. Just close that down. For a second, but if not, I'll pick up. Okay, Karra will pick up when she comes back in. Oh, you're back.
I'm so sorry. That's what happens if you never restart your computer. It restarts for you, and that's what my computer just decided was the perfect time to be doing then. So yeah, you want to work out then which books are the most appropriate texts for your children to then be using when you're using the ELS Progress books. The sessions are designed, as Karra said, it's a maximum of 6 pupils, but for some children, they are going to need to have this one-to-one. So you need to take your lead from the child and their individual needs. And if you have the ELS training subscription, as I said before, you can use the enabled training videos that are going to support you. The ELS Progress lessons are based on the GPC recognition and blending for reading. So it's that explicit teach of the GPC and then that activation and that application of their understanding through the sort of blending for reading that we see. There we go. Has that changed to the next slide, Karra? Training to support staff. Thank you. So it's these 2 interventions. If you have the ELS subscription, you can use the Enable Intervention training videos. If you are not an ELS school and you would like to be able to access the training just for the Enable, which is going to support you to underpin that, you can get in touch with us and we can arrange some access for you. But yeah, that would just be on a school by school basis if you get in touch with us. So these are the 2 that we're looking at. It's GPC, so it's that explicit teach of the grapheme, and then the blending for reading, which is that application. The way that the ELS Progress lessons are built, and I will take you through them in a moment, is that rather than having an apply activity for the children to then do, we're actually applying their understanding straight away in the text because we are wanting to support them to develop those fluent reading skills to keep up with the demands of the curriculum that they are then facing in Key Stage 2. Thank you, Karra. So it does follow the same structure as ELS, which makes it really easy for the kids if they've already been using ELS, but equally if you're an adult that has been supporting children with ELS and you know these interventions, it's a really simple thing to then go and deliver. Every lesson is broken down with the text title, so you can see which book it is that matches that session, and it tells you exactly what you're going to find in the book, but it's also going to tell you what you're going to need to teach. So you need to know what the children do or don't know, so that you can then work out which GPCs in this text, and here we've got incredible art, which of these GPCs you are going to need to teach the children before they can access the text. So you can review your GPCs alongside teaching the ones that they don't know and the ones that they may already know. You can break it down into smaller chunks if you need to. We've written this as a lesson plan so that you can deliver it in a complete start to finish. But if you needed to, if you felt like there were too many GPCs that the child didn't know, you could use a GPC intervention to teach those GPCs before moving into this full lesson plan. Again, this is really you understanding what the child needs from you to make sure that they get the support that they need. The lesson plan shows 1 or 2 sessions, but for some pupils, it might take longer to teach any missing GPCs. So that's what I mean, where if you think that for that individual child, I've been into schools where, you can teach child 4 GPCs in a day by just teaching them the interventions, and they're going to be able to learn those 4. But for some pupils, that would be too much. So it's about knowing your children and knowing how many gaps there are to close and what the most effective and efficient way is for them. But definitely be led by the children and their needs. Why haven't they consolidated their GPC knowledge so far? What do you already know about this child from their earlier learning journey? And how can you use that knowledge to support you in closing these gaps now? Is it that potentially they're an EAL learner and they don't hear the sounds frequently enough and they don't get to practice reading and English frequently enough at home? Is it a case of I can teach this and they'll be able to learn all of these sounds, but actually I now know as an adult what I need to do is I need to make sure they get adequate rehearsal of this with me in school? Or is it that the child has struggled to recall them, has struggled to make that journey from short to the long term, from our working memory into our long-term memory? And so what do I need to do to support that child on that journey? So thinking about your specific learners as to how best to address using the ELS Progress lessons with them. But it is very simple. And as you can see, it's very small on the screen here. But if you have the Progress pack and you've got the lesson plan inside, you will see that the teach follows almost precisely the GPC recognition intervention. It's, review the GPC, say the sound, point to the grapheme, review it multiple times. You're going to trace the grapheme with your finger as you say the sound, the child repeats it. This is stuff that they are already used to doing. I'm going to say some words that contain the review GPC. You could use some of the words that are on those word cards, and you're going to use me, then you, and repeat the word. Then you're going to sound talk using me, then you, make the words using the grapheme tiles, or if you have magnetic letters, you can use those. Then you're going to point to the target GPC first, then you're going to sound and blend the word. So it's a really easy model for the children, and if they've been in the lesson intervention as well, it's the same process. You know, these are steps that they are very familiar with. ELS on the whole, we have tried to make the journey for the children as simple as possible so that they are focused on minute things that are actually supporting the outcome, which is that they consolidate that GPC and then they're able to apply it. And then you can continue to repeat that.
Can I just ask you, because we've had a couple of questions in the chat about it, and given we're at the very beginning of these lesson plans, could you just talk everyone through the positioning, how to place the children, how to know where they start as sort of part of that getting started, so assessment to begin with?
Yes, so to work it out, as I say, if you've got your ELS subscription, then you've got access to our phonics tracking tool. So you can use the phonics tracking tool there. So you would want to do the phase 3 and phase 5 assessment. If you know that you've got lots of gaps in phase 3, concentrate on phase 3 first, and then I would go back and assess phase 5 and figure out what gaps I've got there. Diagnostic assessment, if the child is completely new, that's what I say to you in the training videos, and I apologise if you hear me talk about assessment quite a lot, it seems to always be my job. In the training videos, I say that the diagnostic assessment is really for pupils that are new to your setting. So it's for those children that we don't know anything about. We don't know what they know. We don't know what their decoding and blending skills are. We don't know what their oral blending skills are, or if they're segmenting accurately. So the diagnostic assessment is really for pupils that are brand new to your setting. It takes time. You know, I wrote it and I've been using it for years, and it can still take me up to about 15 minutes to get it done. Now, doing that with a class of 10 children, that's a lot of time. But if you've got 10 children that you think might need to go through and use ELS Progress texts, so if you know the children, I just use the phonics tracking assessments. If you've got a new child, that's where I would use the diagnostic assessment. Assessing learners that are demand avoidant, we have a non-verbal assessment that you could use, and you could adapt it to use with learners that are less inclined to participate in your assessment procedure. It's under the SEND filter on ELS. It covers exactly the same stuff that's in all of our assessments, but it's easier to make that into a less formal assessment for those people that don't want to engage with that process. I have lots and lots of schools using it for a variety of children, from children who are non-verbal, children who are selective mutes, there's children who can communicate absolutely fine but don't like doing tests, so they always struggle when it gets to it, children who have anxiety, all those things. Just, you can use this, so you can use that non-verbal assessment, which is, you can break it up more easily as well, because you could do it section by section. It comes as grids, and it's a point. Or I sometimes get the kids to put a counter down on what it is that they're looking, the sound or the word that they've said is the one that I'm looking for, just so that it becomes a slightly more engaging activity for them. But because of the assessment, it's not one long thread where they have to click through every single one, or where you would have to leave and save it. You can just do it grid by grid, which makes it slightly easier for some pupils. Right,
just hopefully that's... as well, if you are using ELS Progress and you're not an ELS school, there is assessment in the back of the handbook. So if you don't have access to the assessment tracker, then there is assessment in the back of the handbook. And I would say similarly, if you are looking to use that non-verbal assessment and you are not an ELS school with a subscription, I mean, I'm assuming most people are ELS schools, but I realise that there might be some who aren't. You can contact us and we will supply you with that non-verbal assessment. Is Tara frozen again?
Oh, my computer is just really loving me. It keeps trying to restart.
Picks the best times. We can hear you. We just can't. We've just got a frozen image of you.
Oh, right. OK, well, hopefully it's not a bad face. Right. Next slide. So we've done review and teach, and then we are going into practice. Just waiting for it to update on my screen. So here we are saying the new words that come on the word cards. That's our opportunity to pre-teach the vocabulary. We're using the spelling sequence, which children are already familiar with. In Key Stage 2, if you don't want to use robot arms and blending hands, you could use phoneme fingers, or sometimes with a sensible group of children, you could tap the sounds on the table. The purpose of this is visually for us, but also for the children to recognise that there are separate sounds within the word. And so if you've read the E letter from ELS this week, yesterday, you'll have seen that I explained what robot arms and blending hands was for, how and why and when we use them. So it's understanding for you and also for the child that these are separate sounds within the word and that each of those sounds then have their own spelling. So you can just make an adaptation there. And actually, for the most part, if kids have been doing robot arms and blending hands, they don't tend to have a problem with doing it in Key Stage 2, but some quite like to drum it out on the table. Happy to you can make your adaptation there for the pupils that are in your group. So you use your spelling sequence, you're going to break down the word, you're going to ask the child to use grapheme tiles or magnetic letters, and they are going to build the word. Please don't give them 50 grapheme tiles or magnetic letters, give them the pool of letters that they're going to need. The focus is on, can I say the sound, can I hear the sound, can I put that sound in the right place within the word? It is not, can I select one grapheme from 50 on the table? Make sure that it's targeted, just like we do in the lesson intervention. We don't want to overload the kids. It's not a challenge, it's a task for making sure that I've got the sound placement right within the word. Then you're going to repeat that with 3 further words, making sure that you explain this to them throughout, making sure that you're explaining this to them, explaining the meaning of these words to them from the word cards. Then, if you want to build further fluency, you can follow the steps below and use further words. So the children are going to say the new words from the word cards. They're going to use the spelling sequence to break down the word, just like we would do in the blending for reading intervention, identifying the focus GPC. They're going to sound talk the word, blend the word together, explain the meaning of the word, and they're going to repeat that with 3 further words. In the first read through for each word, you're going to ask the child to spot the grapheme, sound talk the word, and then read the word. And the second read through for each word, you can model reading that word more fluently, just like we do in the blending for reading intervention. Then we go into apply, which is the next slide, please. Thank you. So this is where the children are then going to show that understanding through their direct application. During ELS, this can take place through the apply activities, through your shared reading texts, or if you're doing an intervention in ELS, blending for reading, you're going to have a book or a decodable text or a GPC recognition, you have the decodable text that you use. In ELS Progress, this is where those texts that come with the pack are used. These are already matched to what you are going to teach. So this is your apply activity. This is where you get to see the children directly applying their understanding of that code in the text. So you can use these texts. If the child is ready to use it, then get on with reading it, and the children can start to read those with you in the session. You can then read that with the children, prompt them to sound out any words that they struggle with. They should be able to read the text independently. You could have a paired reading approach if you felt that that was more useful, where you've then got that other person who's there to error correct you and to help you and support you with decoding and blending. Or you could have children who are reading one by one. It's up to you. You know what your children need, but do make sure that they are tracking what they're reading by pointing at the word that they're reading. That's going to help them to become more fluent as well. We know that there's a lot of research around paired reading and how it's going to support developing reading fluency. So you might opt to use that. That's why we use it in ELS. You may opt to use it all the time in ELS Progress. You can then read as far as the remaining time in the session allows, and then the child should be able to reread the text at least 3 times, just like we say in ELS, at least 3 times, either in school or at home. And this is where a bit of professional judgment comes in, is that if you know that that child isn't getting the support that they might require at home, make sure that you're reading with them in school and that you're reading with them as frequently as possible, and if possible every single day, because we want to speed up that reading journey for that child so that they can catch up with their peers and that they can then make sure that they're maintaining the pace of the curriculum that you are teaching, because they can actually keep up with the reading that's required for them. At the end of the session, Make sure that they're only reading that text that you've taught them, and that you'll look at the second text in that follow-up session later on. And then if you have the follow-up session, it's essentially session 2 on the next slide, please. Thank you, Karra. You can repeat all of those sections that I've already spoken through, and then go through your second text. And that's going to help to consolidate that information further for the children. But again, if you're needing to supplement it further, or if you're needing to take a slightly slower, more graduated approach to covering those GPCs, it might not be 2 sessions. It might be that you need to spend 2 sessions for each of the texts within the book. You could supplement the sessions, and as I say, if they're not ready to read the texts here, I've said that you can make use of other information that you already have from ELS. If you've got the apply books in your school, you could use some of the sentences or captions or phrases that are in there. So you can use other things if you want to delay the reading of the text, if you want to give them more time to consolidate that GPC knowledge. But hopefully you can see from me having just spoken it through that this is the GPC recognition intervention and the blending for reading intervention put together to form a more formal lesson, which is about 12 minutes in length. And then you've got that time, which I would recommend about 8 minutes, to see if the children are able to now apply that to that reading in the text. And if they're not ready, if you think, right, I've got to break this down into 2 sessions, I'm going to teach these ones and I'm going to give them sentences I know that they can decode, and I'm going to make use of what we've already got from ELS. Or you can just go on with reading the text. So it is very simple and very similar to the GPC and the blending for reading. So if you've already been doing those in your school and your staff know how to deliver that, this is going to be really simple and easy for them to pick up and go with. The difference is that this time the application is a text that's appropriate for the children and their age group, rather than those simpler texts that we were seeing in early years in Key Stage 1. But just make sure, and as I said at the bottom here, and I know I've said it a few times now, that you're matching your pace to the needs of the child. Everything is really simple. Everything is given to you for you to give to the children. It's very repetitive, just like with ELS. It's very clear for the kids. They should know exactly what to expect when they turn up. It shouldn't be something that changes every time. We're not asking them to learn games and gimmicks, because we know that that actually distracts from the core content, which is learning the GPCs. But this time they have that text that is appropriate for their age group, that feels like they're on par with their peers. It feels successful for them to have access to these books. And that's what we want this to still be, as a success model. So if the children aren't ready to read the texts after that first session, you know that you need to recover those GPCs, do them again, and then apply by reading the book. So take your lead from the children. There would be no harm in you teaching this session 1 once, and then repeating it again before you ask them to apply, if you weren't sure that the children have fully understood those GPCs. Right. What's on the next slide?
That's me, the next one. I just wanted to reinforce a couple of things that Tara said here as well. One, in terms of breaking the sessions down, if you need to, into more sessions, all the guidance is provided in the lesson plans for that. So it tells you how you should do that. Also, if you are finding that a child is not ready to move on to the next set of GPCs, the next book, there is another lesson plan provided in the handbook that you should go through to reinforce that, to consolidate before they then move on. So we are absolutely not recommending that children move on until they're ready. Tara said a number of times there, this is about success. These are children who haven't had the easiest reading journey and probably don't feel hugely confident in their own ability with reading. And so success is the really important thing. We've had a question in the chat as well, Tara, about taking the book home. And I know you said it should be 3 reads. And I think we really need to reinforce that to parents if they're taking the book home as well. We want them to feel like they're succeeding at reading. So it doesn't matter if they're reading this text a number of times. It's really good if they're reading the text a number of times, because it's building their confidence. And I think that's one of the really important things alongside Progress, is that they're learning the GPCs that they weren't able to access before. They're learning to read, but we are building their confidence whilst doing it, because the majority of these children will feel like their confidence has been knocked. And that's all in there. All of that support in order to make sure you're consolidating is all provided in the handbook. Right, costs. So ELS Progress is sold as a pack, like we've said. So within the pack, you've got 12 of those RISE readers, 12 of those decodable books that are pitched at the right level for these children in Key Stage 2. You've got a set of ELS grapheme cards that cover phases 3 to 5, and you've got the ELS Progress handbook. The cost of the pack is £645. There's 20% off until the 31st of October. So that's just on the pricing. And then questions. I'm not sure if we've missed anything in the chat. I'm just going to scroll through.
There are none in the Q&A. I've just checked that.
Fab. We've got one here, Tara. Would you use ELS for EAL pupils year 6 new to English?
I would. I would think that if they're brand new to English, showing them the progress texts might be initially a bit of a shock to the system because there's an awful lot of content on those pages. What I might choose to do is briefly use something like, and it just happens to be sat at the other side of my table, I might briefly use something like the Essential Blending books or the Essential Phonic Readers, or whichever books that you have that match from earlier on, because you're going to have to teach them phase 2 first. Just because that child is new, potentially in year 6 and as an EAL learner, does not mean that they can't pick up that code knowledge quickly. It just means that they currently don't have any. So what we want to do is make it feel non-threatening to begin with. And I say this as having spent most of my career teaching in a school where I had 90% EAL pupils. So my big thing is always to make it as non-threatening as possible to begin with, because there's already a lot of change. You're in a new country, you're in a new setting, you're with new children, you don't know what's going on half the time, you're trying to figure out what the instructions coming out of that adult at the front of the room's mouth mean and where on earth you're supposed to go at playtime. So trying to make everything as simple as possible in those first few weeks particularly is key. So for me, I would use something like this just because it's got the language, but it's also then got the imagery to support. So you're actually teaching them the meaning of words as well. So I would use something really simple to start off with, and then as soon as they've got that phase 2 knowledge, I would start to choose books that are slightly more complex that match the original ELS progression or your phonics program's progression, that have got more content, that so it feels like they're doing more reading, but then as quickly as possible I would move them onto a progress text. But it would not be the thing I'd show them on day 1, because there is already so much going on for that child that showing them a book that's got a page of text is going to overwhelm them. So just get them to that point as quickly as possible, but I would definitely start with something simple to begin with. And if you aren't an ELS school, you can there's an online library that you can use ebooks, and you might be able to use get access to that to be able to use some of the texts that support the program in that way. Hopefully that's answered that question, and I haven't made up something that you can't do.
It's also worth noting on that as well that you'll see from the flashcards, the grapheme cards that are included in the ELS Progress pack, that ELS Progress starts with the phase 3 sounds. So again, you'd need an alternative if they haven't learnt those phase 2 sounds. I was going to try and reply to some of these in here, but actually they're coming through thick and fast. So
fine, we'll go.
I think it probably makes more sense to do this.
How many sessions are suggested a week? Yeah. And would it be expected to have several children for several sessions, or could children dip into as needed? It's totally up to you how many sessions run each week. Personally, I would try to run 2 sessions at least a week, because I don't want to teach you something and then just leave you with a heaving gap for a week until I catch up with you again. I want to make sure that I'm giving you the opportunity to consolidate that understanding. That's why we suggest if children need intervention earlier on when they're learning phonics, we do that daily. So in our school, we are using Progress, and we've currently got it that we're doing 3 sessions a week. And that's working quite well in our school that has moved to ELS recently, and therefore is now trying to close some historical gaps from what they were doing before. So they're using Progress and they're doing it 3 times a week. Exactly the same thing that I'd said before, actually, is that they've split that session, that first one, they're teaching it, and then the second session, they are then reviewing it. Now, these children have lots and lots and lots of gaps because the phonics program that they were using before is wildly different and didn't get them to the same place that ELS does. So they've got a lot of stuff to catch up on. So that's how they've set out their weeks. And then they are reading that text that matches those sessions from that week throughout the following week as well, to make sure that they're keeping on practicing like we do with ELS in the classroom. You get to Friday and hopefully every child's on that text that matches that week of teaching, and then they read it for the following week. Consistency is key. So if the child has gaps, they're going to be in the ELS Progress session. And if they don't have a gap in that part, then they won't need to be in it. So it's just about making sure that you're closing those gaps. Depending on what level of staffing you have, you might be able to run two different progress groups at the same time. So if one child has got a phase 3 gap, but then actually they've closed those phase 3 gaps and the next gap is actually in phase 5, and that other group are now doing that same group of GPCs, you could just move them to a different group. Or if you are just rolling through it as you can put them in and drop them out as you need, so that they can dip into the sessions that are needed. Karra, you better answer this one. Can you buy additional reading books?
I'm going to pass it on even further, and I'm going to pass it to Caroline for this one. Caroline, could you answer the question that's next in the chat in terms of, can you buy additional reading books without having to buy the whole pack?
Yes, you will be able to from November. You'll be able to get them as single copies as well.
Okay, hi, we've started ELS in all of Key Stage 2 year groups based on phase 3 and 5 phonics tracker assessments. What happens if a child completes the intervention but still aren't secure? Could you repeat it as often and easy? Absolutely. And that's what I say to schools all the time, is that if you do that GPC recognition intervention and that doesn't do the job, do it again the next day and just change some of the words that you're using. So you could use that same principle. You could teach the GPC recognition intervention just from the main program, and then you could also do it again the next day. And you could teach the GPC and blending for reading intervention as one by sandwiching them together in the kind of the original ELS format, and deliver that a few days in a row to make sure that you've then covered all of those GPCs, and then do the progress lesson. But yes, you should absolutely, you can repeat it as often as needed. I would say that if you feel like you might go insane if you see that same child back for the 9th time learning the same GPC and you haven't moved them on, sometimes actually moving on to the next sound and giving that child a bit of space, you come back to them 2 days later and they go, oh yeah, I remember now. So sometimes if you feel like you've done, if you've done 6 or 7 versions of that same sound in the GPC intervention, sometimes moving on to the next one is actually the thing that gives them the space to then go, right, I've now that information has percolated and it is now there and I know that one. But yeah, you can repeat them, absolutely. There's a word bank in the handbook if you're teaching ELS. There's a huge word bank that Kate and I wrote. There's loads and loads and loads of words that you can go and use for the interventions there. I always try to sort of have at least half the words that come from the lesson as well, so that reduces the amount of words I've got to go and figure out that are with the same GPC in. If a child's sound gaps aren't being filled with consistent GPC intervention, would you recommend Progress or something else? We have a very small group of year 4, 5 and 6 who consistently had GPC interventions last year but made little to no progress. Are those children being given the opportunity to apply that GPC? So if they were doing the GPC intervention, were they then also beginning to use it by using a blending for reading intervention? Because that's the difference here, is that we're getting that direct application. And repetition is key, but if you want to get in touch with me, Kim, els@ks-t.org, and we can talk about this group of children in a bit more detail.
Got frozen Tara again. I will let Tara come back to that question when she's back, because she was halfway through answering it. But I think she was saying to contact them anyway, and they'll be able to offer some more support there. Are the books available as ebooks? They're not. They are just part of the pack. They are not going to be in the ELS ebook library. They are just available as part of that pack. And the idea with the pack is that these sessions might be completed at various places outside of the lesson. And so you can just pick up that pack and take it with you. Abby, I think you've answered the question about sample pages text, haven't you? So if you want a link to some sample pages, just scroll to the end of the chat and it's just in there. Are there any, oh, that's that one. Okay, so could you use it for year 2? So this is specifically designed for year 3. So we've designed it for Key Stage 2. The idea in year 2 is that you refer, if you are using ELS as your SSP, then you have got some guidance on the online subscription for year 2 about consolidating that learning in year 2, and you might go back and pick up and review as necessary as part of the actual SSP programme in year 2. So we recommend that year 2 you are doing ELS phonics programme and that this is from Key Stage 2 and above. Back, Tara.
What we recommend for year 2 is that you are reviewing phonics daily anyway. We tend to, and with schools ask, I always say to review the whole of the summer. And if you do 2 or 3 sessions a week, and you can keep them short, the children don't need to do the apply activity. So you can keep them short and snappy, but yeah, just get that constant review so that the children are then absolutely consolidating that knowledge.
And if you filter to year 2 in Oxford OWL, there's a little hack that talks you through that, isn't there, Tara, about what to
if you need to
in year 2 and about using the summer.
And if you need to reteach anything, then you can follow that and you can reteach the graphemes. Okay, I think that's the end of the questions. I mean, I hope it is, because my computer hates me today.
We've got one.
Oh, here we go.
One more that's just come in.
Your child who is fairly confident with phase 5 GPs but are overwhelmed by alternatives, what would you suggest to do? They do need to learn the alternatives, because they're going to need to, they need them for accessing the full curriculum. So what is in the year 1 national curriculum is up to, I would say, what Katie and I call the phase 5 alternatives is what we're just the spring term. We'll kind of put it all together in one thing there. About half of that content, well, a little more than half of that content is the requirement for the national curriculum at year 1. So what you could do is, if you have one specific child or a few children that for whatever reason are not able to consolidate that knowledge, and you would like to teach them at a slower pace because that meets the needs of your pupils, you could use the SEND guidance. There's an enable pack that slows down the teaching, and it slows that down so you spend 2 days focusing on the lesson rather than 1. So that might be the first thing that you could do. The other thing is that looking at those GPCs as a group. So when I teach spring, I only look at the focus sound, and I look at all the ways I know how to spell that sound in my review. So for example, if I'm looking at A, I just show the children all the ways we know to spell the sound A, or all the ways that we know to spell the sound I. So it might mean that I've got fewer flashcards in my hand, but it also means that we are then looking at all the different ways that we know to spell that sound. So at every opportunity, I'm then showing the children what we already know and making it as simple as possible for them to engage with. And then I tend to put those flashcards from whichever phase they may be next to each other, so children can see. Yes, pretty similar to what's on that spelling poster, Sarah. I can just see you've added another comment. And then I'll have them at the front of the class, and I'll make sure that I'm constantly reminding children that this is the way that we're spelling it in this lesson. Then you have got the spelling poster. You've got, I think it's going to go up soon, and looking at Karra to gauge her reaction, because what I'm about to tell you is that I think if you've got ELS spelling, there's going to be a table size version of that spelling poster. So if you're in an ELS school and you've got the spelling program, you'll be able to download that, and it's just like that spelling poster, but it's on a table size for the children. You can print it off in black and white and stick it to the table. So again, you can have that spelling, but that's why things like the mnemonics and the rhymes are so important, so that when you're introducing that sound in the lesson. I was teaching this morning in a school, so I could speak from literal fresh experiences that you have to teach that mnemonic and rhyme. That is what the children are pinning the spelling to. So if you are talking to a child and they say, oh, I know it's E, but I'm not sure which way to spell E, you can say to them, it's E, like in use money to buy honey. So children will then go, money to buy honey. Either they're going to then recall straight away EY, or they're going to be finding it on your wall freeze, and then they're going to be able to apply that spelling. But the mnemonic is to pin that sound to spelling correspondence. So supporting them to recall which one is the right way to spell it, but it also supports them to remember those alternative spellings and those alternative GPCs, because it does get complicated. There's a lot of code, and you could reteach the alternatives in year 2 if you wanted to. Instead of reviewing the summer content, you could reteach the alternatives in year 2. And I know lots of schools do that with great success as well. But we do need to expose the children to them, because otherwise we're just not actually meeting the requirements of the curriculum for year 1. And hopefully that's a long answer. I'm so sorry, Sarah, but hopefully that helps.
Caroline's very helpfully put the link to the slow progression as well, if you're slowing that progression alongside actually teaching the ELS phonics programme. If you're looking at the alternative graphemes as part of ELS Progress, the lesson plans also say to break down how you teach those alternatives as well. So if you're just finding that it's the alternatives and they're in year 3 and you're using ELS Progress, then absolutely break it down over more sessions, and guidance is provided for that in the handbook as well. So it's the same themes running throughout ELS and ELS Progress.
Thank you. I think that's all the questions. Just going to check the Q&A box. There's nothing in. Oh wait, there's Q&A questions. Whew. People have posted in 2 different places. Key stage 2 have 3 times 20-minute slots for a reading intervention. I know that this is not ideal. What are your thoughts on breaking this into review, teach, practice on the first day with the following 2 sessions as review and apply? Melissa, great question. You could do it in 20-minute slots, because I recommend that you spend about 12 minutes on the review, teach, practice, and then apply is about 8 minutes. So you could teach the first lesson twice, then give the children the book, and then on session 2, it's the second session with the second text you could do in your 3rd session of the week. But just, like whenever you introduce anything, the first week is just going to take a little bit of practice for everybody involved, so that routine can run smoothly. So let it play out for the first couple of weeks, just while people get the intervention up and running. But then you should be able to do it 3 sessions across the week, and if not, then you could split it. So you could do review, teach, practice in the first day, review, teach, practice, apply, because this part will be quicker in the following sessions. Hopefully that's helpful. Sarah, you've got how many? You've already. I think I've asked this one. Yes, we've already answered this one. How many sessions per week?
Yeah, I think that is all of them.
Great.
Thank you
very much
for taking the time to listen. And obviously, if there are further questions, then do get in touch with us, and the recording will be circulated as soon as possible following this session. Thank you.
Thank you.